What is going on, everyone? Welcome back into the 415ers podcast. Evan Giddings and Marc Randy with you as always, coming at you 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. Marc, it's a Wednesday. It's a hump day. What's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm doing well, Evan. Good to be back with you for another edition of the podcast. Another, week after a win. Things are feeling good over in Ninerland. Another road game coming up. They're out on the East Coast still. We're, of course, still here in San Francisco. The name of the podcast, obviously, the 415ers. We will always be here in San Francisco, but the Niners hanging out east and looking forward to another game out on the East Coast, and we will get a morning game now out here in San Francisco, 10 o'clock kick in Atlanta against the Falcons. So looking forward to another week of Niner football.
Yeah, we are always settled here in the Bay. You, as a listener, should download, rate, and subscribe and give us 5 stars every single time you hop on the 415ers page, wherever you download your podcasts. A couple of notes before we get into the nitty-gritty, Marc. 49ers updated today. We'll find out throughout this week, and of course, we'll update you on Friday who might and might not be playing based on, of course, the amount of injuries, the amount of players that will have to be plugged in for those injuries, as well as potentially some guys who are coming back. But 49ers today on Wednesday, or at least yesterday, on Tuesday, released Marlon Mack. The era is over after 2 games, along with a fumble recovery for him.
What a great era it was.
Short-lived, but we appreciate the contribution as always. They signed defensive tackle T.Y. McGill. So that's really the only thing we have to update the roster on for right now. So the question that I sort of wanted to start with today, Marc, and it was spurred by the Steiny and Guru show from 12 to 3 on 95.7 The Game. They had our Odyssey NFL insider Ross Tucker on, who kind of mentioned, when asked specifically about Jimmy Garoppolo and what is on the horizon for the 49ers as far as this season, as well as the future is concerned, of course, with Trey Lance sidelined for the year, he mentioned something in this quote that I thought was really interesting. The fact that he said, quote, there will be no more preconceived notions in San Francisco as it pertains to the quarterback situation. And his hypothetical was essentially, look, if the 49ers are able to get to the playoffs, which we all believe them to be able to do, if they make another deep run in the playoffs like they've done 2 out of the past 3 years, and specifically to the conference championship game, it would be very difficult to try and sell both the fan base as well as the organization, the actual players on the roster, a move at the quarterback position. And so I just thought we'd kind of start there and ping pong this around. Like, I mean, is that a fair statement to make as far as the future of the quarterback for the 49ers if Jimmy Garoppolo helps this team get back to where they did last year?
I don't know. It's a really, really difficult thing to try to, work your way through because, on one hand, you have a team that's had success. They've been to a Super Bowl. They've been to an NFC championship game. I guess technically 2 NFC championship games, winning one, losing the other. And I know Ross Tucker's point was, well, if they get back to that point again this year, how could you possibly think anyone else that you could reasonably get your hands on as your starting quarterback could do a better job than Jimmy Garoppolo? And I fully understand that point, but I think we're kind of getting a little bit of tunnel vision here because, I mean, the story after week 3, that horrible loss in Denver where Jimmy Garoppolo played arguably his worst game as an NFL quarterback. Like it was not pretty. One of the worst, quarterbacked games from both sides that we've seen in the NFL in a really long time. And the story then, just a few short weeks ago, was, oh my God, Jimmy Garoppolo is nowhere near the quarterback that he needs to be to help this 49ers team. And now just 2 games later, 2 wins later, and albeit good performances later, specifically week 5 in Carolina, Jimmy Garoppolo played a whole lot better. But just 2 weeks later, the conversation has entirely shifted, and it's about, oh my God, this guy, the Niners never should have moved off of him. He's the future of the Niners, because if he's going to get you back deep into the playoffs, how could you possibly move off of him? I am not one to really partake in this conversation. I don't think that Jimmy Garoppolo is the future of this team. I mean, you could talk about contracts. You could talk about, the way the roster is set up and constructed. It's not ready to support, a quarterback that's not on a rookie deal or not on an extremely lower number like this Jimmy Garoppolo contract is, despite the fact that, he's getting bonuses every time he starts and every time he wins games. But I don't know. I mean, I don't think that this is Jimmy Garoppolo's future. I imagine he's treating this like kind of a tryout. Someone else is going to sign him in the offseason, and that'll be the end of it. I think there's no way that Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers also go into another season where they have yet to learn what Trey Lance is. At some point, you're going to have to just bite the bullet and do it. Maybe it makes you a worse team in the short term, but in the long term, it's something that you're going to have to do to try to benefit your team. I do not buy the idea that Jimmy Garoppolo is suddenly the future of this team, because a bad Jimmy game is going to come at some point. It's going to come, and suddenly the conversation is going to shift. Oh yeah, this was why he's not good enough to win a Super Bowl. This was why the 49ers tried to move off of him. But we're just, we're creatures of habit. We see what he did recently, and we think to ourselves, whoa, he might be enough for this team. But I don't see it. I really don't.
Yeah, and in all likelihood, that game is not going to come this weekend against Atlanta, or at least you certainly hope that it wouldn't. The issue is that those games tend to come against teams of quality, teams that have good defenses, teams that you will see once you get to the playoffs. And as we sort of tossed around the moment that Trey Lance went down and Jimmy had to become the starter was, look, you can almost pencil this team into the playoffs now because the floor has risen for the 49ers. The question is always what the ceiling is going to be for Jimmy Garoppolo. And that's where I stray a little far away from Ross Tucker and his kind of, it didn't seem like he was suggesting it, but he mentioned the fact that you might, move off of Trey if Jimmy G can get you to a place, that you want to go as far as the title game, a Super Bowl, hopefully even further than that, right? I don't think you can even think about moving off of Trey Lance. Whether Jimmy G is there in the future or not, I would certainly be open to the conversation depending on how this season goes of bringing Jimmy Garoppolo back. But to me, that's more of a ball that's in his court as opposed to the 49ers because of what he's going to probably make for himself this offseason as an impending free agent. So if there was any sort of mutual, want between each other of coming back, I think I'd be more open to that conversation. But if it's at the cost of Trey Lance or the cost of, like you mentioned, the future with what Trey could be, then I'd have to reevaluate some things.
So do you, when you say the ball is in Jimmy Garoppolo's court, are you saying whether or not he would be willing to come back again as a backup quarterback?
No, just come back as a quarterback, and then you run things like normal, which is, Trey, you got to beat him out.
Interesting. Maybe he would be interested in that. I do think that the other factor when you're talking about, what Jimmy Garoppolo might want, I would say at the top of the list is, a chance to be a starting quarterback, and maybe he has a better chance elsewhere. I mean, we've seen just through 5 weeks, there are some pitiful quarterback situations around the NFL right now. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo could easily be starting 5 other places at the moment. More injuries are going to happen. You never know what the offseason is going to what will happen in the offseason. But I think the other area in which this could interest Jimmy Garoppolo is, where else do you think he could perform better than in San Francisco? I mean, it's a system he knows, and maybe it's just a case of what we don't know. Maybe he would be great in other systems with other teams with other head coaches. But it does seem like Kyle Shanahan has the ability to get the best out of Jimmy Garoppolo. He has proven that he can at least win a lot of regular season games and win some postseason games here and there with this system, with this roster, with this coaching staff. If I'm Jimmy Garoppolo and everything else is equal, I have a chance to be a starter everywhere else, I think there's no doubt he'd want to return. But I think where the decision may ultimately be made is that he's probably not going to be given an opportunity, in my opinion, to be this team starter next year, because the Niners are treating this as if their starting quarterback, Trey Lance, got hurt And when he gets healthy, he will be playing again. That's the way I understand the situation. I think that's the way it will shake out. Maybe a Super Bowl win by Jimmy Garoppolo changes things. But I think he probably has a better chance of starting elsewhere. And I would imagine that's what he cares about most.
And I think your logic is reasonable. The only thing that I would combat it with is this last offseason. Like all of those things that you just mentioned are things that were prevalent
Yeah, but
in
I mean,
March of 2021.
but the idea is that he's not going to have shoulder surgery this offseason. I mean, maybe he would, but in this scenario, I think it's a healthy offseason for Jimmy Garoppolo, and therefore he has more suitors.
So, yeah, certainly. That could be, reality. I'm just saying, like, this offseason has told me that I'm not going to expect anything from Kyle Shanahan, from John Lynch, from Jimmy Garoppolo, just because, like, whether the shoulder surgery was the key factor or not, like you mentioned, there's a lot of bad quarterbacks right now, and a few of them on teams that Jimmy Garoppolo could have been a part of. So, and again, like the dollar figure is going to factor into this as well, as far as where he can and can't go. And you're going to have to pay Nick Bosa this offseason. You've already paid Debo. You've already got a lot of big players and core players under contract. So maybe it's just not even feasible to bring him back monetarily speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is going to depend. So, first of all, I think the decision is out of the 49ers' hands. As you mentioned, the ball is in Garoppolo's court. He could obviously decide everything, even if he gets paid a lot of money. If he really wants to return to the San Francisco 49ers, he could take less money to return and play here, potentially not even be the starter. Like, it's there. But even after Jimmy Garoppolo's decision, um, other teams have, a decision to make before the Niners have an opportunity, because of course the Niners are not going to be paying Jimmy Garoppolo a large sum of money when they already have a quarterback on their roster that, regardless of what you think of Trey Lance, regardless of whether you think he's a better quarterback than Jimmy Garoppolo, regardless of whether you think he gives the 49ers a better or worse chance to win than Jimmy Garoppolo does, regardless of your feelings about these two quarterbacks, the Niners have told you over and over and over and over again, even when Jimmy Garoppolo was still on the roster, before and after the contract restructure, Trey Lance is our starter. He's our quarterback. He's the future of this franchise. Jimmy Garoppolo is the backup. So, I mean, moving forward, I'm taking them at their word that will continue. If Jimmy Garoppolo happens to still be on the roster next year, it will be as the backup.
But this is the issue, is that their actions have been different than their words, at least to me. Like, you can come out and say that Trey Lance is our QB1, and then 2 weeks later you bring in Jimmy Garoppolo to be the backup. In my mind, although this is the best scenario for Jimmy, short term, long term, in order to make money in the future and still potentially be a starting quarterback, I think also part of the reason that he was still there in the first place is because maybe he thought he could beat out Trey Lance at some point this season. Injury aside, like, I think that also factors in too. So, look, Kyle Shanahan can say publicly what he wants, but to me, throughout the offseason, towards the end, preseason, like, his actions didn't scream to me that this is ultimately and unequivocally our guy. I think he is. And, well, he should be. He should be. Based on how much you gave up for him, he should be. But there are a lot of signs, and if you kind of read between the lines, read the tea leaves, that they're leaving room for potential, if this thing goes sideways. I don't want to put it off the table and say, all right, no doubt in my mind, 100%, like this is the way it's going to work out.
Okay, let me ask you a question then. Because I think what Kyle Shanahan should be acting on, maybe this seems selfish, but he's a guy that wants to keep his job. He should be acting in his own self-interest. Generally speaking, what is best for him is best for the team. The team does well, Shanahan does well, generally speaking. So let's think about this for a second. Let's assume that Shanahan is acting in his own best interest, self-preservation. He's trying to, make sure that he is as secure in his job as possible. What looks worse for Kyle Shanahan? Jimmy Garoppolo leads this team to the NFC Championship again. They lose, but he has, a successful season. No one else wants him. Whatever the situation comes, he re-signs with the San Francisco 49ers. And he, once again, is their starting quarterback. For whatever reason, Shanahan and the 49ers decide, Trey Lance, I'm sorry, you're not ready. In the situation, let's assume that he's fully healed. His ankle's fine. He's ready to go. But Kyle Shanahan decides to stick with Jimmy Garoppolo. Is that worse than in the same situation, Trey Lance is the starting quarterback next year? What is worse? What brings more fire down on Kyle Shanahan? Either basically admitting that everything you had previously thought and said about Trey Lance was wrong, a lie. You said that Trey Lance is the starter. He gives you a great chance to win. He's better than Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo is a backup. Trey Lance is our starter. Is it worse admitting that, or is it worse to move off of a quarterback who just led you to consecutive NFC Championship games, and you went to the NFC Championship game 3 of the last 4 years?